Hey, it's your guy Tyrrell back with the interviews. In today's video, we're going to briefly analyze the main tactical themes in Arsenal's 1-0 win at Bodo Glimt. So in today's video, first we're going to briefly focus on Arsenal's pressing, then we'll shift to the impact that they presented to the Bodo Glimt backline from their right side, and then lastly we'll focus on how Bodo Glimt improved in the second half. So when we break it all down and we do look at the board, we have Bodo Glimt in a 4-3-3, and Arsenal in the same shape as expected with several changes. Nketiah and Nelson joined the front line, Fabio Vieira and Odegaard were ahead of Lokonga, and we witnessed Holding and Tierney join the back line. What we ended up seeing from Arsenal in terms of their pressing was very simple and effective. They had Nketiah stepping forward to press the center back with help from Saka, and then they had 3v3 in that midfield zone. They had Odegaard sitting on Berg, and then Fabio Vieira and Lokonga dealing with the shuttlers, while White pushed forward to deal with the left back, and Saliba would shift across to deal with Pellegrino. There were situations where you witnessed Saka staying on the left back and Odegaard pushing forward to lead the press with nketiah, and from there you'd see Fabio Vieira pushing forward to deal with Berg, and Nelson would drop off in towards that midfield zone to pick up Fabio Vieira's man. If he didn't do that, that would leave Vetlesen free in that midfield zone, so Nelson was tasked of dropping off a bit deeper and narrow to ensure that Arsenal were picking up numbers in that midfield zone. And then when Arsenal dropped off into two banks of four when they weren't pressing from the front, you have Nketiah and Odegaard sitting on Berg, and then in that midfield zone, Fabio Vieira and Lokonga would track the movement of the shuttlers, while Nelson and Saka did a very good job of dropping off deeper to protect their fullbacks to ensure that the Bodo Glimt fullbacks couldn't push forward and create overloads in Arsenal's third. In large spells of that opening half, Arsenal did a very good job of neutralizing the Bodo Glimt attack and their build-up. Therefore, when we shift to Arsenal in possession, they did shift into a 3-2-5, with Holding pushing forward to the left center-back role, Saliba shifting to the middle, and then White would hold his position as a right center-back unless he was making runs off Pellegrino who wasn't tracking them. That would see Tierney moving laterally in towards that midfield area, while Fabio Vieira and Odegaard would push higher beyond the midfield bank to receive the ball. Nelson and Saka would hug the touchline, and from here what we ended up seeing from Bodo Glimt was that they were a narrow 4-3-3, and they had their wide players pushing out to close down the wide center backs, and then in that midfield area you'd have Lokonga and Tierney looking to drop off to receive the ball. However, in this scenario, the Bodo Glimt midfield bank pushed forward and stayed within close proximity of the front three, and from there they were building a hexagonal shape around Tierney and Lokonga. So from here, Arsenal's backline were getting pressed, they were struggling to get the ball into Tierney and Lokonga. They would have to drop off deeper in towards the gaps of the center forward and the wide player to receive the ball, but Arsenal's best bet in terms of bypassing that press stemmed through Fabio Vieira and Odegaard adopting wider positions on the outside of the Bodo Glimt shuttlers, where they were simply dropping in towards the gaps between the shuttler and the wide player, specifically Odegaard, to receive the ball and then link play with his teammates. But on several occasions it was Odegaard and Fabio Vieira shifting out towards the touchline on the outside of the wide shuttlers to receive the ball, and that helped Arsenal push forward. Outside of that, we witnessed nketiah dropping off deeper and looking to link play with his teammates and serving as a direct threat in behind. Nelson struggled to have an impact down that left-hand side, and a lot of Arsenal's impact stemmed down the right. Because Bodo Glimt's midfield bank was so narrow, there was space for Fabio Vieira and Odegaard to receive the ball and then progress play out towards Saka. On top of that, if Arsenal wanted to bypass that hexagonal shape, they could simply play balls out towards the wide areas, and they did that often with Saka, and from there he'd be in 1v1s because Pellegrino was tracking back late or not tracking back at all, and then the midfield shuttlers were caught in central positions and it would take them a while to come across to provide cover. In the earlier stages of that game, you witnessed White consistently making overlapping runs and Saka playing him in, but when White received the ball near the byline, he was struggling to combine with his teammates with his deliveries. It was clear in the opening stages of that opening half that with Pellegrino not tracking White, that White and Saka were looking to get Saka in 1v1s against the left back, or simply get him to break in beyond by scooping balls over the top so Saka could break in behind him or across him to get into legitimate goal scoring positions where he could create for his teammates or place himself into a shooting position. However, Arsenal's ability to get Saka into 1v1s with the left back presented issues through the movement of Odegaard and Lokonga. Odegaard was now looking to make runs off the shuttler in towards the space ahead of the center back, and from here he was simultaneously taking both players out of the game. because the center back didn't want to pick up Odegaard, but then the shuttler would eventually track back, and then he would pick up Odegaard in that zone. And with Odegaard making forward runs, he was dragging both in towards the penalty area, and with White making overlapping runs at times, that would drag away Pellegrino. However, in many of these situations, Pellegrino would track back late. The shuttler would shift across to try and help out the fullback, and if the shuttler wasn't tracking back with Odegaard, then Berg was tracking back with Odegaard, and Odegaard was still taking two players out of the game. From there, Saka would slow down the play, drag the left back and the shuttler towards him, and then look to split both by playing the ball into the path of Lokonga, who was running off the center forward who wasn't tracking his movement. So what would end up happening here is that Saka would play the pass in between the two Bodø Glimt players towards Lokonga or Odegaard, and then look to make runs off the left back in towards right half space to get the return pass. So as you can see, the biggest issue here for Bodø Glimt is that Berg and the center back are occupied by Odegaard's movement, and then Saka's dragging away the shuttler. So now if you have Berg and the shuttler pulled out towards Odegaard and Saka, that forces the center forward to drop off in towards his own third to pick up Lokonga. Lokonga was now free to make unmarked runs in towards the final third, as he would drag the center forward deeper, but the center forward wasn't willing to track his movement, and from these positions he was capable of impacting the game to get Saka into legitimate goal-scoring positions. Arsenal repeated this move on several occasions in that opening half, ultimately led to the game-winning goal. Here you have Saka in the 1v1 with the left back, and he's looking to cut on towards his left foot and focus on Lokonga and Odegaard. Lokonga's running off the center forward, and Odegaard's occupying Berg in the center back. Saka splits two players with a square pass to play the ball into Lokonga, and he runs off the left back to receive the ball in right half space, and from here he's placed in a legitimate goal-scoring position where he fires a low effort off the sliding center back into the back of the net. Here you witness Fabio Vieira playing the ball back into the path of an unmarked Lokonga and focus on the right hand side. He forces Berg and the center forward to step towards him, and what Lokonga does well here is that he anticipates that pressure, he holds them off, and he slides the ball into the path of the unmarked Odegaard, which now creates an overload. And before Pellegrino could step in to make a challenge from behind, Odegaard slides the ball across the left back for Saka, and the mistake Saka makes is that he should be hitting the ball here, but he ends up letting it roll across his body, and that's why he ends up scuffing his effort wide of the net. Therefore, when we shift to the second half, while Arsenal struggled to create legitimate goal-scoring opportunities against this Bodø Glimt side, the key player throughout that second half was Vetlesen. He was popping up into pockets of space to the right of Nelson in the gap between Nelson and Fabio Vieira or Nelson and Lokonga, and he'd receive the ball in those pockets of space and then push forward to progress the play. Outside of that, if Bodø Glimt wasn't playing long balls over the top trying to get their forwards in behind, it was the deep midfield runs from Vetlesen off Xhaka and Fabio Vieira's shoulder that enabled him to create legitimate goal-scoring opportunities for himself or create space for his teammates to get shots on goal. Here you see the center back pushing into Arsenal's half and focus on Vetlesen running off Fabio Vieira into the gap between Holding and Tierney. You could see that the long balls played into Vetlesen in between those two defenders, and he instantly chests the ball into an unmarked center forward running off Saliba, but from this position he ends up skying his effort over the net. And then later on in that half, you witness Vetlesen running off Xhaka, and you can see Holding's occupied, so he pushes into that gap between Holding and Tierney. Xhaka doesn't anticipate that pass, and the ball ends up being played around Holding and Xhaka, and fortunately for Arsenal, Vetlesen's unable to control that ball to break free 1v1, and that halts the attack. So as you can see, Arsenal's pressing in base shape out of possession neutralized the hosts' attack in the opening half, and the right side combination with the midfield presented a legitimate threat, but once again, midfield runs from deep in the second half nearly proved costly.